Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the military training ground, her small frame barely visible among the towering oak trees that surrounded the shooting range. The morning mist hung low over the Georgia hills, and the air carried the sharp scent of gunpowder from previous training sessions. At 22 years old, Sarah looked more like a college student than a potential military sniper. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her uniform seemed 2 sizes too big for her petite build. The other recruits gathered around the equipment table, their voices carrying across the quiet morning air. Most of them were men who had grown up hunting with their fathers, bragging about deer they had shot from hundreds of yards away. They spoke in loud, confident tones about their shooting experience, each trying to outdo the others with stories of perfect shots and trophy kills. Sarah listened quietly, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the instructor prepare the rifles. She had learned long ago that speaking up often led to more questions than she wanted to answer. Her background was different from these men. She hadn't grown up on a ranch or spent weekends at shooting competitions. Her path to this moment had been carved through necessity, determination, and countless hours of practice that nobody knew about. Sergeant Mike Thompson, a gruff veteran with 20 years of service, began calling out names for weapon assignments. His voice boomed across the range as he sized up each recruit with experienced eyes. When he reached Sarah's name, he paused for a moment, looking her up and down with obvious skepticism. "Martinez," he called out, his tone suggesting he wasn't entirely sure she belonged there. "You ever fired anything bigger than a BB gun?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several of the male recruits turned to look at Sarah, some smirking, others shaking their heads as if they already knew the answer. Private Jake Henderson, a broad-shouldered farm boy from Texas, let out a small laugh. "Sarge, maybe we should start her off with something smaller," Jake suggested, his voice carrying just enough mockery to make his intentions clear. No shame in working your way up to the real weapons. Another recruit, Private Chris Walker, nodded in agreement. "My little sister tried shooting once. Nearly broke her shoulder with the recoil. Some people just aren't built for this kind of work." Sarah felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. She had faced this kind of doubt before, and she knew that words would never convince these men. Only results would speak louder than their assumptions. Sergeant Thompson assigned her an M24 sniper weapon system, the same rifle given to the other recruits. As she approached the firing line, she could hear the whispered conversations behind her. The men were making bets about how many shots it would take before she gave up, how badly she would miss the target, whether she would even be able to handle the rifle properly. The shooting range stretched out before them like a long, green corridor. Targets had been placed at various distances, starting at 200 yards and extending all the way out to 800 yards. The closer targets looked manageable, but the distant ones appeared as tiny dots against the hillside backdrop. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, causing the target flags to flutter slightly. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The weapon felt comfortable in her hands, like greeting an old friend. She adjusted her grip and checked her sight alignment, going through the mental checklist that had become second nature to her over the years. Behind her, Private Henderson leaned toward Private Walker and whispered, $5 as she can't even hit the 200-yard target." "You're on," Walker replied quietly. "I'll bet she start crying when the rifle kicks back." Sergeant Thompson raised his hand for silence and began explaining the exercise. Each recruit would have 10 rounds to demonstrate their marksmanship skills. They would start with closer targets and work their way out to longer distances. Points would be awarded based on accuracy, and the results would help determine who would advance to specialized sniper training. "Remember," Thompson announced to the group, "this isn't just about pulling a trigger. A sniper needs to account for wind, distance, elevation, and a dozen other factors. One small mistake can mean the difference between mission success and complete failure." Sarah nodded along with the others, though she already understood these principles intimately. Her breathing slowed as she prepared for her first shot. The range fell quiet except for the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. She could feel the eyes of every recruit focused on her, waiting for her to fail. The first target stood at 200 yards. Sarah adjusted her scope and took note of the wind direction. Her finger found the trigger as she aligned her breathing with her heartbeat. The world around her seemed to fade away until only the target existed in her vision. The rifle cracked, sending its bullet downrange with deadly precision. Through her scope, Sarah watched as the bullet struck the target dead center, creating a perfect hole in the bullseye. Behind her, the whispered conversations stopped abruptly. Sergeant Thompson lowered his binoculars and looked at the target with surprise. "Good shot, Martinez," he said, though his tone suggested he thought it might have been lucky. Sarah moved on to the 400-yard target without saying a word. Again, she went through her routine of checking wind conditions and adjusting her scope. The second shot flew true, striking the target with the same deadly accuracy as the first. This time, Thompson didn't need his binoculars to see the result. By the time Sarah lined up her third shot at the 600-yard target, the range had fallen completely silent. Even the other recruits had stopped their conversations to watch her work. There was something different about the way she handled the rifle, a confidence and precision that spoke of extensive experience. The third shot punched through the distant target with perfect accuracy. Sergeant Thompson's expression had changed from skepticism to curiosity. He had seen many recruits come through this range, but few showed this level of skill on their first day. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Thompson asked as Sarah prepared for the 800-yard target. "Practice," Sarah replied simply, not taking her eyes off the distant target. She didn't mention the countless hours she had spent on her grandfather's ranch in Montana, where he had taught her to hunt elk and deer across vast mountain valleys. She didn't talk about the shooting competitions she had won throughout high school or the state championship she had claimed when she was just 17 years old. The final target sat 800 yards away, a challenging distance that required expert knowledge of ballistics and environmental factors. Sarah studied the target for a long moment, watching how the grass moved in the distance to gauge wind patterns. She made minute adjustments to her scope and settled into her final shooting position. Private Henderson no longer looked amused. His confident smirk had been replaced by genuine surprise and growing respect. Private Walker stood with his mouth slightly open, unable to process what he was witnessing. Sarah's final shot echoed across the range like thunder. Through the spotting scopes, everyone could see the result clearly. The bullet had found its mark with the same precision as the previous 3 shots, creating another perfect hole in the center of the target. Sergeant Thompson set down his binoculars and approached Sarah with a new expression on his weathered face. The mockery and doubt that had filled the air an hour earlier had been replaced by stunned silence and grudging admiration. "Outstanding shooting, Martinez," Thompson said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the first time that morning. "I've been running this range for 15 years, and I've never seen a first-day performance like that." Sarah stood up and shouldered her rifle, her expression remaining calm despite the dramatic shift in atmosphere around her. She had proven her point without saying a word, but she knew this was just the beginning. The real challenges would come when her abilities became known to the higher-ranking officers, and when she would have to prove herself again and again in increasingly difficult situations. As the other recruits packed up their equipment, their earlier confidence had been replaced by quiet respect and curiosity about the small woman who had just outshot them all. They began to realize that their assumptions about Sarah had been completely wrong, and that there was much more to her story than anyone had imagined. The morning sun climbed higher over the Georgia hills, burning away the mist and revealing a clear, bright day ahead. Sarah cleaned her rifle with practiced efficiency, her movements sure and steady. She knew that word of her performance would spread quickly through the base, and that soon she would face new challenges and new doubters. But for now, she was content to let her shooting speak for itself. The targets downrange bore witness to her skill, and the impressed faces of her fellow recruits told her that she had taken the first step toward earning the respect she deserved. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but Sarah Martinez was ready for whatever came next. 3 months after her impressive debut at the shooting range, Sarah Martinez found herself assigned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where the Army's most elite sniper training programs took place. The rumors about her shooting skills had traveled faster than she had expected, creating a reputation that preceded her wherever she went. Some soldiers viewed her with respect, while others remained skeptical, convinced that her earlier performance had been nothing more than beginner's luck. The advanced training facility at Fort Bragg was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. The ranges extended for miles across rolling hills and dense forests, with targets hidden in the most challenging locations imaginable. Some targets were positioned behind buildings, requiring shots through narrow windows. Others were camouflaged so well that spotting them required hours of patient observation through high-powered scopes. Staff Sergeant David Chun, the lead instructor for the Advanced Sniper Program, had 25 years of experience training military marksmen. He had heard about Sarah's performance in basic training, but he remained cautious about getting too excited. In his experience, soldiers who showed early promise sometimes struggled when the pressure increased and the challenges became more complex. Martinez, Chin called out during her first week at Fort Bragg, "I hear you can shoot. Let's see how you handle real sniper work." The other trainees in Sarah's class included some of the Army's most promising marksmen. Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes had been a competitive shooter before joining the military and had already completed 2 combat deployments. Specialist Tony Rodriguez came from a family of law enforcement officers and had been shooting since he was 8 years old. These men had proven themselves in actual combat situations, and they weren't easily impressed by training range performances. Chun led the group to an observation post overlooking a valley that stretched for more than 2 miles. Hidden throughout the landscape were dozens of targets, some stationary and others designed to move randomly. The exercise would test not only shooting accuracy, but also the ability to spot targets, calculate complex ballistics, and make quick decisions under pressure. Your mission, Chin explained, is to identify and engage enemy targets while avoiding civilian casualties. You have 2 hours to complete the course, and every shot must be justified. One mistake could compromise the entire mission. Sarah settled into her position behind a massive Barrett M82 rifle, a weapon that fired .50 caliber rounds capable of stopping vehicles and piercing light armor. The rifle weighed more than 30 pounds and generated enormous recoil, but Sarah handled it as if she had been using it for years. Through her scope, she began scanning the valley methodically, looking for signs of hidden targets. The task required incredible patience and attention to detail. A target might be visible for only a few seconds before disappearing behind cover, or might be camouflaged so effectively that only the slightest movement would give away its position. Sergeant Hayes, positioned 20 yards to her left, was the first to spot a target. His rifle boomed as he engaged what appeared to be an enemy sniper hidden in a water tower nearly a mile away. The shot was perfect, and Chin nodded approvingly as he confirmed the hit through his spotting scope. Sarah continued her patient search, ignoring the pressure to make quick shots like her competitors. She had learned from her grandfather that rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes in sniper work could be fatal. After 15 minutes of careful observation, she spotted something unusual in a cluster of trees at the far end of the valley. Most people would have dismissed the slight discoloration in the foliage as natural camouflage, but Sarah recognized it as artificial concealment. She watched the area for several more minutes until she detected the faintest movement that confirmed her suspicion. A sniper was hidden in those trees, positioned more than 1,800 yards away. The shot would be one of the most challenging of her career. At that distance, she had to account for wind drift, bullet drop, air density, and even the rotation of the Earth. She made careful calculations in her head, adjusting her scope and checking her range card multiple times before settling into her final shooting position. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with tremendous force, but Sarah had braced herself properly and maintained perfect follow-through. Through her scope, she watched the distant target collapse, confirming another successful engagement. Chun lowered his spotting scope with an expression of genuine amazement. "Outstanding shot, Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a new level of respect. Most snipers couldn't make that shot with 5 attempts. Specialist Rodriguez looked over from his position with obvious surprise. He had been watching Sarah work and was beginning to realize that her reputation hadn't been exaggerated. The precision and confidence she displayed were unlike anything he had seen from a soldier with so little formal training. As the exercise continued, Sarah identified and engaged 6 more targets with perfect accuracy. She spotted enemies that others had missed, made impossible shots through narrow windows, and demonstrated an understanding of advanced ballistics that impressed even the most experienced instructors. When the 2-hour exercise concluded, Chun gathered the trainees for a debrief session. Sarah's performance had been exceptional by any standard, but what impressed Chun most was her tactical thinking and decision-making under pressure. "Martinez," Chun said as the group prepared to leave the range, "I'm recommending you for the Advanced Urban Warfare course. It's typically reserved for soldiers with at least 2 years of sniper experience, but I think you're ready for the challenge." News of Sarah's continued success spread quickly through Fort Bragg's sniper community. Other instructors began requesting her for their training exercises, eager to see if the stories they had heard were accurate. Some officers remained skeptical, suggesting that training range performance didn't necessarily translate to combat effectiveness. Colonel James Morrison, the commanding officer of the sniper training program, decided to observe Sarah's next exercise personally. Morrison was a decorated veteran who had commanded sniper teams in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had seen countless soldiers come through the program, and he had developed a keen eye for identifying those with genuine potential for special operations work. The exercise Morrison chose to observe was one of the most challenging in the entire program. Trainees were required to infiltrate an urban environment, locate high-value targets, and eliminate them without being detected. The course included multiple buildings, underground tunnels, and rooftop positions spread across several city blocks. Sarah received her mission briefing at dawn. Intelligence indicated that enemy commanders were meeting in a building complex defended by sentries and security patrols. Her task was to eliminate the targets while avoiding civilian casualties and escaping without detection. Failure would result in immediate dismissal from the program. The urban environment presented challenges completely different from open-range shooting. Buildings created wind tunnels that affected bullet trajectory in unpredictable ways. Glass windows could deflect rounds, and the presence of innocent civilians meant that every shot had to be calculated with absolute precision. Sarah spent the first 2 hours of the exercise in reconnaissance, studying the target building through her scope and identifying patrol patterns. She noted the positions of security cameras, the timing of guard rotations, and the locations of potential escape routes. Her patience and attention to detail impressed Colonel Morrison, who was observing from a command post several blocks away. When Sarah finally took her first shot, it was a masterpiece of precision shooting. The target was visible for less than 3 seconds through a narrow window, partially obscured by curtains and more than 600 yards away. Her bullet found its mark exactly as planned, and the target dropped without alerting the nearby guards. Over the next hour, Sarah systematically eliminated 4 more targets with the same deadly accuracy. Each shot was perfectly timed and flawlessly executed, demonstrating not only superior marksmanship, but also exceptional tactical awareness and fieldcraft skills. Colonel Morrison watched the entire exercise with growing admiration. He had commanded some of the military's finest snipers, but Sarah's performance was remarkable even by those standards. Her combination of technical skill, tactical thinking, and calm professionalism suggested that she possessed the rare qualities needed for the most challenging special operations missions. When the exercise concluded, Sarah extracted from the urban environment without being detected by any of the security forces. Her mission had been completed with textbook precision, and her performance had exceeded all expectations. Colonel Morrison requested a private meeting with Sarah immediately following the exercise. As she entered his office, still wearing her camouflage uniform and carrying her rifle case, Morrison studied her with the intense gaze of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Martinez," Morrison began, his tone serious but respectful, "I've been commanding snipers for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what you demonstrated today. Your shooting is exceptional, but more importantly, your tactical decision-making and situational awareness are at a level I typically see only in soldiers with years of combat experience." Sarah listened quietly, unsure where the conversation was leading. She had learned to be cautious when receiving praise, knowing that compliments often came with increased expectations and new challenges. Morrison leaned forward in his chair and fixed Sarah with an intense stare. "I'm putting together a recommendation for your advancement to a special operations unit. It's an unusual step for someone with your level of experience, but I believe you have the potential to serve at the highest levels of military operations." The weight of Morrison's words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She knew that advancement to special operations would bring new opportunities, but also new dangers. It would mean deployments to the world's most dangerous locations and missions that could determine the outcome of entire operations. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied simply, maintaining the composed demeanor that had become her trademark. Morrison smiled slightly, recognizing the calm professionalism that had impressed him during the exercise. "There's one more thing, Martinez. I'm arranging for you to participate in an inter-service competition next month. The Navy SEALs are sending their best snipers, and I want you to represent the Army." The news sent a jolt of excitement through Sarah, though she kept her expression neutral. Competing against Navy SEALs would be the ultimate test of her abilities and a chance to prove herself at the highest level of military marksmanship. As she left Colonel Morrison's office, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the skeptical looks at basic training to the respect of seasoned veterans, she had proven herself through consistent performance and unwavering determination. But she knew that the real challenges were still ahead, and that each new level of success would bring greater expectations and more demanding tests of her abilities. The inter-service sniper competition took place at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia, where the military's finest marksmen gathered to test their skills against each other. Sarah arrived at the base on a crisp October morning, carrying her rifle case and wondering what she would face in the coming days. The competition would include participants from all branches of the military, but the Navy SEAL contingent was widely considered the team to beat. Colonel Marcus Stone, a legendary Navy SEAL with over 30 years of service, commanded the SEAL sniper team. Stone had earned his reputation during classified operations around the world, and his snipers were considered among the most elite warriors in the American military. He had heard rumors about an Army soldier who was making waves in sniper training, but he remained skeptical about anyone who hadn't proven themselves in actual combat. The competition grounds sprawled across thousands of acres of Virginia countryside, with ranges designed to simulate every possible combat scenario. Urban environments, desert conditions, mountain terrain, and jungle settings had all been recreated to test the sniper's abilities in diverse situations. The event would last 3 days, with increasingly difficult challenges designed to push even the most experienced marksmen to their limits. Sarah was assigned to a barracks building alongside snipers from the Army, Marines, Air Force, and Navy. As she unpacked her equipment, she couldn't help but notice the conversations around her. Most of the participants were seasoned veterans with multiple combat deployments. Their uniforms displayed an impressive collection of ribbons and badges earned in the world's most dangerous locations. Gunnery Sergeant Michael Torres, a Marine sniper with 4 combat tours, struck up a conversation with Sarah as she prepared her rifle for the competition. Torres was known for his friendly demeanor and his willingness to help younger soldiers learn the craft of precision shooting. First time at one of these competitions? Torres asked, examining Sarah's meticulously maintained rifle with professional interest. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, continuing to check her equipment with practiced efficiency. Torres nodded approvingly at the condition of her weapon. That's a well-maintained rifle. Your shooting must be pretty impressive for the Army to send someone so early in their career. Before Sarah could respond, Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, one of Colonel Stone's SEAL snipers, approached the conversation. Sullivan had overheard Torres's comment and couldn't resist adding his own perspective on the situation. The Army must be getting desperate if they're sending trainees to compete against SEALs, Sullivan said with a smirk that suggested he was only half joking. Maybe they think quantity can make up for quality. Torres frowned at Sullivan's comment, recognizing the competitive tension that often existed between different military branches. Every branch has excellent snipers, Chief. Combat experience isn't the only measure of shooting ability. Sullivan shrugged dismissively. We'll see about that. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen a soldier without combat experience who could compete with a SEAL sniper. Sarah listened to the exchange without comment, focusing on her equipment preparation. She had learned that actions spoke louder than words, and she knew that the competition would provide all the proof anyone needed about her abilities. The first day of competition focused on precision shooting at known distances. Targets were placed at ranges from 300 to 1,200 yards, and competitors had to demonstrate accuracy under perfect conditions. This was considered the foundation of sniper work, where technical skill mattered more than tactical knowledge or combat experience. Colonel Stone positioned himself at the observation area, where he could watch all the competitors through high-powered spotting scopes. He was particularly interested in seeing how the newer snipers would perform under the pressure of competing against such experienced marksmen. Sarah approached the firing line with quiet confidence, settling into her shooting position with the fluid movements of someone completely comfortable with her equipment. Around her, the other competitors made final adjustments to their rifles and scopes, some showing signs of nervous tension despite their extensive experience. The first target stood at 600 yards, a challenging distance that required precise calculation of environmental factors. Sarah studied the target flags to gauge wind conditions, made minor adjustments to her scope, and settled into her shooting position. The range fell quiet as the competitors prepared for their first shots of the competition. Sarah's rifle cracked with authority, sending its bullet downrange with deadly precision. Through the spotting scopes, Colonel Stone watched as the bullet struck the target dead center, creating a perfect hole in the bullseye. Several other competitors achieved similar results, but Sarah's shot had been noticeably smooth and confident. As the distances increased, the competition began to separate the good shooters from the exceptional ones. At 800 yards, some competitors began showing signs of struggle, with their shots drifting outside the optimal scoring zones. Sarah continued to deliver perfect shots with mechanical consistency, as if the increasing distance presented no additional challenge. At 1,000 yards, only a handful of competitors were still scoring consistently in the center rings. Sarah was among them, along with Chief Sullivan, Gunnery Sergeant Torres, and 2 other seasoned veterans. Colonel Stone found himself paying closer attention to the young Army soldier, who was keeping pace with some of the military's most experienced snipers. The final target of the day was positioned at 1,200 yards, a distance that tested the absolute limits of the weapons and ammunition being used. At this range, the slightest miscalculation could send a bullet several feet off target. Environmental factors became crucial, and the mental pressure could affect even the most experienced shooters. Sarah took extra time preparing for this shot, studying the distant target through her scope and making careful calculations. She could feel the eyes of the other competitors on her, but she had learned to block out distractions and focus entirely on the task at hand. When she finally took the shot, the rifle's report echoed across the range like thunder. Colonel Stone watched through his spotting scope as the bullet flew true, striking the distant target with the same precision that had characterized all of Sarah's previous shots. The result drew murmurs of respect from the other competitors and caused Stone to raise his eyebrows in surprise. Chief Sullivan, who had been watching Sarah's performance with growing interest, approached her as the day's competition concluded. His earlier dismissive attitude had been replaced by genuine curiosity and grudging respect. "That was some impressive shooting," Sullivan admitted, his tone more serious than it had been that morning. "Where did you learn to handle long-range work like that?" "Practice," Sarah replied simply, using the same answer she had given throughout her military career. Sullivan studied her for a moment, recognizing that there was much more to her story than she was willing to reveal. "Well, whatever you've been practicing, it's working. I've seen a lot of snipers over the years, and you've got something special." The second day of competition introduced tactical elements that required more than just shooting accuracy. Competitors had to navigate through challenging terrain, identify targets using camouflage and concealment techniques, and make shots under time pressure while avoiding detection by simulated enemy forces. Colonel Stone decided to observe this phase of the competition more closely, moving to forward observation posts where he could watch the competitors' fieldcraft and tactical decision-making. He was particularly interested in seeing how Sarah would perform when shooting accuracy was combined with the stress and complexity of simulated combat conditions. The course required competitors to move through dense forest terrain while carrying full equipment loads. Along the way, they would encounter hidden targets that had to be identified and engaged within specific time limits. Some targets were legitimate military threats, while others were civilians who should not be engaged under any circumstances. Sarah moved through the course with the quiet efficiency of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Her movements were deliberate and calculated, showing none of the rushed urgency that characterized some of the other competitors. Colonel Stone noted her excellent camouflage techniques and her ability to move without creating noise or disturbance. When Sarah encountered her first target, Stone watched her decision-making process with professional interest. The target was partially concealed and positioned at an angle that made positive identification challenging. Sarah spent several minutes observing the target through her scope before confirming it as a legitimate threat and making a perfect shot at 750 yards. Throughout the day, Sarah's performance continued to impress Colonel Stone and the other observers. She identified targets that others missed, made difficult shots under challenging conditions, and demonstrated tactical awareness that exceeded her apparent experience level. Her movements through the terrain were nearly invisible, and her shooting remained consistently accurate despite the added stress and physical demands of the course. By the end of the second day, Sarah had emerged as one of the top performers in the competition. Chief Sullivan's SEAL team remained formidable competitors, but Sarah's scores were matching or exceeding those of soldiers with years of combat experience. Colonel Stone requested a private meeting with Sarah following the second day's events. As she entered his office at the base headquarters, Stone studied her with the intense gaze of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Martinez," Stone began, his tone carrying the authority of decades of leadership experience. "Your performance over the past 2 days has been remarkable. I've commanded SEAL snipers for most of my career, and I rarely see shooting of this caliber from anyone, regardless of their experience level." Sarah maintained her characteristic calm demeanor, though she could sense that this conversation would be different from the routine debriefings she had experienced before. Stone leaned back in his chair and fixed Sarah with a penetrating stare. "I've been doing some research into your background, and I have to admit that I'm puzzled. Your training records show exceptional performance, but they don't explain the level of skill you're demonstrating here. There's something you're not telling people about your shooting background." For a moment, Sarah considered maintaining the simple answers that had served her well throughout her military career. But something in Colonel Stone's expression suggested that he deserved a more complete explanation. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old, Sarah began, her voice steady but carrying hints of deeper emotion. He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam, and he saw something in me that made him think I had potential for precision shooting. Stone nodded, understanding beginning to show in his eyes. Go on. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. We spent every summer on his ranch in Montana, where he taught me to hunt elk and deer across mountain valleys that stretch for miles. By the time I was 12, I was making shots that most adults couldn't manage. When I turned 14, he started entering me in civilian shooting competitions under different names so people wouldn't know my age. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for Colonel Stone. What kind of competitions? State and regional championships, mostly, Sarah replied. I won the Montana State Championship when I was 17, but I competed under my grandfather's name because I was still too young for the official records. I probably fired more rounds in practice than most soldiers fire in their entire careers. Colonel Stone sat back in his chair, finally, understanding the mystery that had been puzzling him for 2 days. Why didn't you mention this in your military records? Sarah shrugged slightly. I learned early that people have preconceptions about what a sniper should look like and where they should come from. I figure it was better to let my shooting speak for itself rather than deal with questions about my background. Stone studied Sarah for several long moments, processing the implications of what she had just revealed. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. What does he think about your military career? A shadow of sadness crossed Sarah's face for the first time since Stone had met her. He passed away just before I enlisted. Teaching me to shoot was his way of preparing me for something he knew I was meant to do. He always said that exceptional shooters aren't made through training alone. They have to have something inside them that can't be taught. Colonel Stone felt a deep respect for the young woman sitting across from him. Her journey from a ranch in Montana to competing against the military's elite snipers represented the kind of dedication and natural talent that appeared only rarely in any profession. Martinez, Stone said finally, his voice carrying a new level of respect. Tomorrow is the final day of competition, and it includes some of the most challenging shooting scenarios we've ever designed. But I want you to know that regardless of how you perform tomorrow, you've already proven yourself as one of the finest marksmen I've ever observed. As Sarah prepared to leave Stone's office, the colonel made one final comment that would stay with her for the rest of her career. Your grandfather would be proud of what you've accomplished, Stone said quietly. And I suspect this is just the beginning of what you're going to achieve in the military. The final day of competition would test everything Sarah had learned over years of practice and months of military training. But for the first time since arriving at Quantico, she felt that her true abilities had been recognized and appreciated by someone who understood the dedication required to achieve her level of skill. Colonel Stone's acknowledgement of her achievements meant more to Sarah than any medal or trophy could have provided. She had finally found someone who understood that her exceptional shooting ability wasn't just the result of military training, but the culmination of a lifetime of dedication to the demanding art of precision marksmanship.